Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Welcome, friends. I'm Johnny Fortune with the National Institute of Building Sciences. And joining me today, all the way from London, England, Mr. Adam Matthews. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Johnny. Good to be here.
Very glad that you took out some time of your busy schedule, a globetrotter, to come and sit down and talk with us about general topic of digital transformation and what's happening around the world and how that applies to what's happening here in the States. So we always like to give our guests an opportunity to share a little bit about themselves with our audience. So tell us a little bit about what you do and some of your background.
Okay. Well, I'm, as you said, just based outside London. I've been connected with BIM for about 15 years, I guess. Initially, through the company that I was employed with, which is Autodesk. I got involved with then the UK BIM program, helping to write some of that element of the strategy, and then went into the international side.
Okay. So did you always live in London? I'm just curious. And that was your kind of your station with Autodesk before, and that's where it led to your work there?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I've been in the UK now, London for about 20 years. Yeah, just over. Yeah.
So it's very interesting. You mentioned the BIM strategy for the UK, and a lot has been published about that. A lot of it has been talked about it, and of course, ISO standard. The British standards were developed, and then ISO standard developed out of that. And so, but I want to go a little further back about how did you get involved in the industry to start with? So yeah, you were with Autodesk, and that's how it led to the whole BIM strategy for the UK. But like, what led you to the building industry?
Well, going a bit earlier than that, I was actually involved with statistics. So I was really into statistics and how information can support decision making within businesses. That was my first degree, and from that went into operational research, and from there into GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and that then around 2007, 2008, a time when BIM was on the rise. Within Autodesk, I got involved with some people that were looking to promote it in the UK, and from there I got connected to the UK program. So that was kind of what led me into the BIM side, was through the GIS side initially.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I know recently we certainly talk about digital transformation today, and that's a broad topic. It means a lot of different. It's kind of a buzzword too for folks, and but recently you've been recognized for a lot of your contributions, and really quite impressive. And I hope I don't get this wrong, but I believe you are an officer of the Order of the British Empire now. You've had this incredible distinction. So that had to be an exciting. I feel like we should have had like a lot of music, and more pomp and circumstance as UK. That's quite an honor.
It is. It's very humbling. It was a surprise, if not shocking, actually, when I was notified that was happening. And it's it is a very humbling thing to have kind of awarded. So I was invested in the order by the Prince of Wales.
Wow.
At Windsor Castle, which is just very close to where we live. So that was an amazing day. Yeah.
Very impressive. And that came from all of your work through BIM-related work and the BIM strategy?
On the international side mainly. So how working with other countries outside of the UK, helping those countries to adopt BIM in a information management way. You mentioned the ISO, of course. That's a significant part of how to standardize and align, help the industry to align in terms of its understanding of information management, and to get benefits from that. So that was a big part of it. It was helping to create trade between countries in particular.
So I think all that's, it's really, really quite impressive. And I think it's important for our audience to help make the connection. And I did not realize that you had worked in statistics previously. And now I understand so many of our conversations where, you have to have that tangible piece to connect to. So that I think that really speaks to your background. And one very exciting thing for me of having you as a guest on this episode of the podcast is this work you've done and the accolades, just very, very impressive. But you've had this view from a global perspective. You've had it from a country perspective. You've had it from a global perspective. You've also been able to take some of that knowledge and help other countries that are trying to move along some of those same lines. And so I want to go back to this topic or this term of digital transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I know that can be a very long answer, but if we were riding an elevator and I said, "Oh, what is digital transformation? What does that mean to you? How would you succinctly describe that?"
Well, for me, it's the ability to change how you deliver something, or it's the change in a function and how something is performed. So for me, it's not to give the counterexample. It's not doing the same process with newer tools. It's fundamentally changing the character, the nature of a service, or creating a new service as a function of digital.
Wow. Great answer. So for our audience, if you would tell us a little bit about more of your work with the UK BIM adoption, and I know you kind of touched on it briefly, but give us a little insight about how that went. It was a multi-year effort, right? Yeah. And just for the folks that may not know, walk us through just a little bit of those details.
Yeah, so it really came about because of a bad situation, really, which is the lack of funding there was in sort of after the crash in 2008, 2010. And it was a response to the lack of public funding, really, to say, well, we've got to change. We've got to do something significantly different back to transformation that will allow us to continue to build the infrastructure that we need as a country, but to do so with less cost and to create better assets, to create better infrastructure also at the same time. So it was this kind of twin coming together which started the whole program off of, first of all, a big challenge, a real compelling lack of funding, need to build infrastructure, but the opportunity that digital provides. Obviously, digital is great in terms of providing better quality information to make better quality decisions. So it was the coming together of that kind of started the whole program off in the UK, which I think was probably the thing that separated the UK at the time from other activities. For example, in the Nordics, there was GSA, obviously, in the US here. We're doing things in Singapore. We're also around the same time taking an approach to this. I think the UK was driven by a real high-level policy goal. It needed to be done from a big country-level perspective. So just an interesting thing of that is that we couldn't just say, well, we want to engage the architects on the design side. It had to be everybody. We wanted to lift up the whole industry, not just the leaders in the industry, not just the leading architects, but if we could get everybody to be 10, 20% better as a whole industry, that would then deliver a significant benefit to the country, and ultimately to the public sector as a owner of all those public infrastructure assets. So for me, that was the real distinction of the UK program and recognition, hey, it's process here that's going to get us there. We talk a lot about information management, and we tend to probably skip over the fact that it's process innovation really that we're talking about there. Back to your question about digital transformation, and that's the hardest thing, because there are all these processes in the construction sector that are really well honed over years and years to work as effectively as the industry does. So they then say, well, we need to improve the process, not just do the same process with different tools, but change the process. And that was the big jump, I think, that the UK kind of made with the ISO in particular.
Yeah, and I think, that problem that you mentioned of needing that transformation, certainly was not limited to the UK. I mean, we've seen, and it's been well reported, the construction industry here in the US lags behind almost every other industry, right, in terms of productivity. And so there's certainly a lot of opportunities for improvement. And it sounds like many other nations around the world are looking at that as well and saying, hey, we need to make some improvements. And I think some of your work really has become a model, for how countries can't approach it. So what are you seeing elsewhere around the world? I know you've been working with a lot of different folks and different initiatives.
Yeah, I think there's first of all, if we look at kind of regions, first of all, in Europe, we saw a lot of collaboration with our European partners there back through 2015 through 2018 and longer, was to bring people together. That was the first step, is getting people together, then helping people to understand the opportunity that digital would provide, and then helping to implement. And the national strategy that the UK took was, as you say, was become a little bit of a model which other countries have adopted, because it sets out 4 really simple key ideas of things that need to be in place for this to work effectively. So leadership, first of all, you need to bring people together, bring communities of people together, having a clear standard, very clear definition of that process piece, not just the information exchange itself. And then finally, doing things to drive capacity at scale. 1 project is good, 5 projects better, 50, but getting that up to 1,000 projects affecting the whole industry, that I think has been the model that other countries have kind of looked into.
So the 4, just to recap those, because I think those were really incredible for our audience. I want to make sure that they heard that the 4 were leadership, community, standards or standardization, and capacity building. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about capacity building several times, and it's interesting. We've had quite a few episodes for our podcast and multiple recordings, but a theme that continues to come up is people, right? And really that is at the heart of, and I really appreciate that idea that you guys saw the need to bring people together to solve the problem or find the solution, right? And again, that's kind of a real connection for NIBS. That's what we do as we convene subject matter experts. We help bridge the gap between public and private. So definitely a lot of alignment there. So I can see before I became involved in the National BIM program, I think you were already involved. You were involved in the early ideation of what a United States National BIM program would entail. So give us a little insight of some of those early discussions and what it was like and how that was shaping up. And I know that you've been a trusted advisor, with the path of the program since and beyond, and we really appreciate that. But give us some insight into how you became involved in the National BIM program and some of those early ideas that were explored.
Yeah, well, I think the initial meeting, I must just actually say a little bit about that, was meeting Roger Grant, the executive director for the program, back at a Building Smart event in, I think, 2017, if I recall correctly. And it was the idea of that creating a standard that could help the information management piece, I think, for the industry, that I think that Roger initially kind of clicked onto and said, well, that is interesting. What you've been able to do there is interesting. So that was our first kind of connection. And then over a couple of years, the idea grew to be, well, maybe there is an opportunity to create a program here in the US that could take some of the ideas from the UK model, but adapt it, contextualize. Clearly, things are different here in the US. It's a much more federated approach. It's a much more commercial and business-led approach as well. I think that's fair to say, although it is worth noting in the UK, although it's perceived as a government program, it was termed a government BIM mandate. In reality, it wasn't a mandate as such. It was public owners were being encouraged to introduce BIM as a requirement and then into delivery of projects to help make better decisions. But it wasn't actually a mandate. So that's the first thing. And secondly, it wasn't really BIM. It was about information and the management of information that was really being requested as a requirement. So it's interesting when you kind of pull these things apart that actually there's a lot of similarities with what now the US is adopting. So I think just to come back to your question, what I think the US is really doing is going to the core principles of how to create a coalition, a coalition of the willing. Let's call it that, which is willing public owners that recognise the value of this, and also on the commercial side as well, the private sector kind of saying, well, we recognize there's going to be value in this for us taking an aligned and consistent approach using standards and so on. So definitely some adaptations.
Sure.
But yeah.
So what's very interesting to me is I can't tell you how many times I've heard people in the industry, at various conferences here in the U.S. talk about the UK BIM mandate. And so you've just revealed that one, it wasn't really just about BIM modeling. It was information led, and then also that it wasn't a hard mandate. So interesting if as our audience hears that, if they can kind of begin to understand that the approach was not an authority mandating it, but it was a coalition.
Actually, let me just say on that as well, because there were about 300 different people were involved in the original kind of definition of that BIM strategy. It was called the government's BIM strategy. But there was huge consultation across the whole of industry, from the FM side, designers, architects, and engineers, and also then through into the contracting. So huge amount of people were actually involved in that from the private sector side as well. You just reminded me of that.
Yeah, and so that's a very different approach than people to be. What is perceived as okay. Here's a mandate. We kind of went in closed session. Here it is. Now you guys go execute it. Right. That's not the way that it happened. And sometimes when, the BIM UK mandate rolls off the tongue so easily for folks, it may have a different connotation, right? Yeah. And so was one of the things I really appreciate about, again, you being a trusted advisor and helping us understand the process that you guys took there in the development, of this NIBS initiative, the U.S. National BIM program. And I appreciate that, because I continue to hear the idea of capacity building and community building and coalition. And it reminds me of a really important leadership principle, is that you always need to be able to get willing cooperation, right? And one thing I appreciate about what you say many times is helping to describe the value, people understanding the value of what it's not change for the sake of change. It's leading to providing value for the whole industry as well as individuals. So again, on behalf of NIBS, I want to thank you for your involvement in the National BIM program. And I joined, last year to work alongside Roger and with volunteers like yourself on furthering advancing the National BIM program. So it's an interesting tie to what, you bring all this knowledge and this experience. And some of the things that we're trying to do here for the U.S. National BIM program, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. In fact, if you look at our implementation plan, and I know you have many times, we have those same four, right? We have those same four: leadership, community, standards, standardization, and capacity building. So let me ask you here: what parallels do you see that's kind of happening as you did the work in the UK. You've been very involved in the development of the U.S. National BIM standard. Are others kind of going down this road to saying, hey, we need a national program as well? And can you talk about some of those parallels and maybe some of the differences and how they're progressing? In
other countries, you mean?
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's worth saying as well that this is not it's not a one size fits all kind of model. I think it's very important to recognize that every country has its own different ways of contracting. Some are more informal construction sectors as well, where contracts have less, and standardization. I mean, just standardization is a significant part of what we are proposing here to create value. Value through standardization is kind of at the center of a lot of this. You can create a lot of momentum and value if you can create repeatability and consistent understanding and so on. So I think that is really important to recognize. If you have a country that has less familiarity with standardization and use of standards, development standards, then clearly you've got to do some more foundational things to support standardization in the construction industry. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of flag for your audience as well that it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. We're working with if we work with Chile, for example, really well, with Colombia, with Peru, Vietnam, a number of countries in Europe as well. So I think there's huge differences culturally, size of the economy, levels of digital maturity. I think that's sort of to be recognized as well. The digital infrastructure within a country is always different.
Yeah.
But I certainly think that there are these kind of things that we see time and time again. It's back to what you said first of all. It's like what does BIM mean? What does it mean? Because I think it means this. And so oftentimes it's starting from creating consistent definitions and language. And that's one of the things that I really get excited, enjoy and get a lot of pleasure from. Actually, is just creating a more consistent understanding and helping to build that understanding.
Yeah. Are you seeing like a lot of the outcomes are the same? I mean, I know you kind of go through that process and talk about what problem are you trying to solve? What are we trying to achieve? And are you seeing that there's a consistency in outcomes of what like each of these countries are trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's so the process is similar. Sometimes the outcomes are different.
Okay.
Some countries, for example, are really focused on value for money, getting more value for money. There's a fiscal crunch here, just lack of funding. We need to build more infrastructure. So this is a pathway to do that because you can become more efficient with digital, obviously, with BIM. Other countries are looking at climate resilient infrastructure. They're looking at better ways. Just a quick example in Peru, the reconstruction of Peru's following El Nino 2017. That was really about bringing communities together that have been cut off, or building infrastructure for those communities that would be more resilient for the next El Nino, which I believe is kind of happening right now. We're in the beginning of, I think. So that's a really different kind of outcome to some other countries that are just looking to get better value for money. They're looking at a social outcome there. This is about people having shelter, housing, schools that will work in different climate environments.
Very interesting. So I know all this work that you've been doing, and the Global BIM Network. Many people may not know what that is, and again, you've a bit of a globetrotter being involved in all of these, which is fascinating. Talk a few minutes about the Global BIM Network, I know that the Institute, National Institute of Building Sciences, we have MOU with the Global BIM Network, and so we're helping to contribute that. But for our audience may not know it even exists, what would you say to them about the Global BIM Network?
Well, the Global BIM Network is a public sector network, really bringing together policymakers, infrastructure owners, really anybody from the public sector side that is interested, looking at, exploring how can they introduce BIM into their public procurement, into their delivery of public infrastructure. Or they're already doing it and they want to share lessons, or they've got some challenges and they want to try to share some knowledge with others, or learn something for themselves. So really it's a peer-to-peer network, essentially. That's what it is. And but also is part of a broader change agenda, which is to accelerate the digital transformation of the construction sector globally. Which is kind of what motivates me and gets me excited, really, is to see that transformation happening around the world, and the network is working towards that as well.
Yeah, we see that in one of the core principles for the U.S. National BIM program is to accelerate digital transformation and drive the adoption of life cycle information management, right? Beyond just the idea of modeling something, but how can that information inform the life cycle of an asset? So I always when I have the opportunity, like to ask this question about some of the challenges or opportunities that you see, and really appreciate your global perspective and your experience. So what are some of the ones that are really rising to the top for you that you're seeing, industry challenges, or opportunities that we're right here on the at the threshold of?
I'll start with the opportunities first.
Okay.
I think, and then we come back to challenges. I think in terms of opportunities, if we look back over the development of BIM as initially technology, a design tool, seeing it as a tool that architects or even engineers could then use to model a particular physical asset, obviously, and think about how that would work in the real world. Simulate it. If you're an engineer, of course, you want to be able to simulate that. Simulate the energy performance of a building through the glazing type that you use, or the orientation of the building on the earth. So I think from that, it's evolved to have a much greater circle of influence. Initially, contractors, and now clients and then governments saw the value of that rising, because governments could see, well, we have a national benefit here. If we can drive this digitalization, we have a real value to the country. And I think now we're seeing just something else emerge, which is development banks and funders, large funders of infrastructure around the world are seeing the same thing, that they can invest in this approach, which then helps to get better value for money for infrastructure funds, which are huge sums of money going into infrastructure. Of course, 10 to $15 trillion globally, huge amounts of money. So if you can get a 5, 10, 15% or so value out of that, I think that's a huge opportunity. So that's where I would start first of all. Is really significant opportunity there.
And I presume, you're so active in obviously the Global BIM Network, but also in different countries as well as this country with helping us with the U.S. National BIM program. That's part of the solution, right? That's part of the solution of moving towards seizing that opportunity and overcoming the challenges that we face. Very, very briefly, just is there emerging technology that's got your eye right now? Is there something that's like, I'm really paying attention to this emerging technology to see how it impacts the construction industry?
Well, clearly, more broadly, there's AI. You can't ignore its potential. I think we're now seeing examples of where AI is being used to even write code, to write actual code to solve problems, to solve structural engineering problems or on-site construction problems. So I think that's something that we probably didn't expect to happen so soon.
Yeah.
So I think you can't ignore how fast this is going. It seems like the curve is just going kind of exponential, which is just quite astounding. So I don't think you can ignore it. Not quite sure what it means, though. In a sector level change. That's I think the question a lot of people are asking. I think for me, obviously, digital twins. You can't also ignore the fact that there's this shift from BIM, which was largely around the building of the built environment.
Yeah.
Largely, there is discussion around that, but I think largely digital twins then is clearly coming into that operational space. How do we improve the operation and use actually of the built environment by getting a digital version of that and then having a communication back and forth to inform simulation, what if scenarios, and making better decisions? I think that's clearly going to be the next, really exciting area.
Yeah, very, very interesting. From a NIBS perspective, we're trying to tie all these pieces together as part of, the U.S. National BIM program. So appreciate all your contributions, your effort. Again, your trusted advisor role that's really, really provided a unique perspective. So segue to one of my favorite parts of our podcast. We like to have a little bonus material. And I always like to have a fun question about, what might be an important fact about you, something people wouldn't see in your resume or in your bio, or tidbit of knowledge, whatever you might be willing to share with our audience. A little fun fact. What do you got, Adam?
Well, I'm certainly. This certainly isn't on LinkedIn. I'm a huge country music fan. There you go. I don't know if I've shared that with you before, Johnny.
Old country music, or like current modern country music?
Mixed actually. Back to Kenny and Willie. But also more modern stuff as well. I'm good for it all. So I'm definitely gonna try and get to Nashville sometime.
Nashville, all right.
That's on my list.
Well, I was a drummer. I still am. I just don't play very much anymore. So if you need a drummer, if you make it in Nashville, you need a drummer, look me up. What's next for you? What's on the horizon here for you right now?
Well, next is that we've clearly got a lot of work to do with engaging with countries still. So I think that's going really well. I think the next stage is the transition, the tricky transition between doing a lot of the policy level, even organization level kind of strategy and those things, transforming that into implementation. So I think a lot of our work over the next couple of years is probably going to be making sure that the effect is concrete and implemented. Yeah.
Very good. Excellent discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today. I mentioned the National BIM program several times. So for our audience, if you want to find out more information about that, you can simply go to our website at nibs.org, or you can go directly to usbimprogram.org, and you can find a lot more information. And certainly give us some feedback about this episode. Look us up on YouTube. You can watch the video version or subscribe and listen to any of the podcast channels that is your choice. Thank you so much, Adam. Really appreciate you joining us today. Stay tuned for future episodes. We'll continue to talk about emerging technologies and things related to the built environment and the initiatives that NIBS has going on to work on these opportunities, challenges, and solutions. See you next time.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.